Welcome to this second video in the series that I'm making on Othello by Shakespeare. This video is an introduction to who the different characters are and what they do in the play, and there'll be some more detailed videos later looking at the specifics about each of the characters. As usual, make sure you're taking notes as you're watching the video, and you can see the template there on the side. So first of all, we're just going to give you an overview of who the characters are in the play, and I've organised this kind of graphic organiser according to the social hierarchy in the play. There are lots of different ways that we could organise the different characters, but this will give you an introduction to them. So I've put their social status, their power, up the side of the graph. And at the bottom of it, I've shown kind of how closely aligned they are to Venice, which is one of the main contexts of the play, or how closely aligned they are to Cyprus, which is the second main setting of the play. So first of all, we have the Duke of Venice, who is in charge of the Venetian state, and then we have Brabantio, who is Desdemona's father, Gratiano, Ludovico and Montano, and these people are all senators. They're all part of the ruling elite of the Venetian Republic. We also have Desdemona, who is Brabantio's daughter, and she has eloped with Othello, very much against her father's wishes. So very importantly for the play, we need to know that Desdemona is white, as are most of the characters, and Othello is black. Now, Othello is described as being a Moor in the play, and there are lots of different ways to interpret that, but in modern productions of the play, Othello is usually presented as being black. Now, Othello is an outsider in Venice, but he's married Desdemona, he's eloped with her at the beginning of the play. We have Roderigo, who is a nobleman. He's very affluent and he's madly in love with Desdemona. We have Cassio, who is another outsider in Venice. He is hired by the army and he has just been promoted by Othello. We have Emilia and Iago as well. Now, they're a married couple. Iago is Othello's ensign, his servant in the army, and Emilia is married to Iago, and she is going to be Desdemona's servant after Desdemona and Othello are married. We also have Bianca, who lives on Cyprus, and these characters meet Bianca when they all go over there, and Bianca is a prostitute on Cyprus. So the main character then is Othello. He's a tragic hero, and he's a soldier who's been hired by the Venetian army. He's described as being a Moor, as I've mentioned, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail on the video that's just on Othello. And at the very start of the play, he elopes with Desdemona. He and Desdemona then speak to the Venetian Senate. They're called in front of the Senate by Brabantio, and the Duke gives them permission to remain married. Now, the reason for that is probably because the Duke wants to choose Othello to lead the Venetian forces against the Turkish army. So at the very start of the play, the Duke has received word that the Turkish army have set out to attack Cyprus, which is a Venetian outpost. And it's absolutely crucial for the stability of the Venetian state that this threat towards their authority is vanquished, and Othello is the best captain, the best general that they have in the army, so he's going to lead the Venetian retaliation against Turkey. So Othello leads these forces. They set out on their fleet, on their ships, but a storm destroys the Turkish fleet, and so he and the others arrive on Cyprus completely unscathed. For a play with so many soldiers in it, there's a really disappointing lack of battle scenes for some people. When they're on Cyprus, Iago starts to manipulate Othello. He tells his commander that Desdemona has had an affair with Cassio. After a while, Othello believes Iago, and as a result he murders his wife, strangling her in their bed. Emilia then enters the murder scene and calls for help, and when everyone arrives, she reveals Iago's duplicity, and now that he's realised that he's been tricked and actually Desdemona was loyal to him, Othello ends the play by committing suicide. Okay, our tragic villain then is Iago. He's a soldier hired by the Venetian army, just like Othello is. His name suggests Spanish origins, although at one point in the play it's implied that he comes from the Republic of Florence, which was a kind of competing republic opposed to Venice, but also in Italy. So Iago's origins are a little bit questionable. In a lot of ways he represents the kind of stereotypical Venetian gentleman who treats women very he objectifies women, he's also extremely racist and so on. In other ways, the suggestion that he's from Florence seems to be quite accurate, because Florence was known to be the home of Machiavelli, and Iago is Machiavellian in lots of his behaviours, and again we'll look at that in the video that's just on Iago. And Iago's motivations for causing Othello's downfall are very much debated. So one of the main quotations which is often cited for this is the idea of motiveless malignity, which was suggested by S.T. Coleridge quite early on in the critical history of the play. Now, what Coleridge meant by that was that actually Iago has no motivations whatsoever. He's just an evil person, and everything that he does in the play just comes out of that particular kind of malevolence and desire to hurt other people. Now, there's other ideas in the play which would question this. So Iago and Emilia, both at different points in the play, suggest that Iago is jealous of Othello because he believes that Othello has had an affair with Emilia. So Iago worries that Othello has done my office betwixt my sheets and things like that. Now, there's never any proof that Othello has had an affair with Emilia. In fact, they don't really even particularly interact. They're very cold towards each other. There's no hint at all that this is true. But Iago doesn't always need proof to believe in things, and this is a good enough reason for him to start hating Othello. Iago also has a deep-seated racism, which may be his motivating factor. He doesn't like the fact that he is being ordered around by someone who he thinks should be lower than him in the social order. Iago's also jealous of Cassio, who's been promoted ahead of him by Othello. And towards the end of the play, it's indicated that Iago is motivated by a desire to destroy everything that's good. And then when Emilia reveals what Iago's done at the end of the play in terms of bringing about Othello's downfall, Othello tries to get his revenge, so he stabs Iago. Iago's wounded, but he survives, and then he's taken away to be tortured. And it's really frustrating at this point of the play, because at the denouement we expect all of the loose ends to be tied up, we expect everything to be resolved and to know and understand everything. And so some of the characters turn towards Iago and they say, basically, why did you do this? What was behind this plot? Why did you make this happen? And Iago just refuses to speak. And so the play is in some ways quite unresolved, because Iago almost has the last victory in refusing to give an explanation for what he has done. And he just leaves the characters and the audience wondering what the source of his kind of malevolence is. Desdemona is another central character. She's the tragic victim. She's Brabantio's daughter, so she's part of the elite of society, Venetian society. And she's first spoken of when Iago says that she has eloped with Othello. We learn that Othello and Desdemona's courtship was brief and superficial. So before the play's action begins, Brabantio invited Othello round to tell stories of his life. And Othello has amazing tales of journeying to exotic places and fighting in battles and so on to tell to Brabantio. And while Othello is telling those stories, Desdemona is sitting there kind of listening to them, and she becomes entranced by these tales. So when Othello and Desdemona find themselves alone for a moment, she hints at her love, and then they plan to get married. After the elopement then, which we learn of at the start of the play, Othello and Desdemona are brought before the Senate, where they explain that their love is genuine and that no witchcraft has been involved. Now, this is part of the stereotypes around wars at the time, that the only way that Othello could have won the love of a white lady is that he must have involved some kind of enchantment, or he must have bewitched her. But both of them insist that that didn't happen and that their relationship is genuine. And it's a real moment of hope in the play, you know, the sense that this could be a forward-looking society which might accept a marriage, a sense of love that would unite people rather than dividing people. Desdemona then insists on travelling with the Venetian fleet to Cyprus, and she travels on the same ship as Iago and Emilia and separately from her new husband. Arriving on Cyprus, Desdemona is quite flirtatious with Iago. She's very witty and she seems to enjoy her new sense of freedom. But then, of course, Iago starts to manipulate Othello. And as Othello becomes more convinced of Desdemona's infidelity, she is initially very frustrated and she's quite vocal, But then she becomes increasingly silent and passive, and she just gives in to what Othello says. You know, she reiterates that she hasn't done anything wrong, but she doesn't seem to actually do anything to get herself out of this situation, which is quite frustrating for the audience. And she's eventually murdered by Othello in her bed. Emilia is another key character in the play. It becomes more important as the play progresses. She's a little bit older than Desdemona, and she's Iago's wife. In terms of the ages of the play, Othello talks about himself as being quite old, so we might picture someone around in the mid-30s or 40 who would have been old for that time, but obviously not for our time. Desdemona seems to be quite young. She seems to be quite naive and to not really know very much about the world, so maybe at 20, something like that. And then Emilia and Iago are somewhere in between. Emilia travels with Desdemona and Iago to Cyprus, serving as Desdemona's maid. At the start of Act 2, Emilia is teased by Desdemona and Iago in particular complains about Emilia's failures as a wife. And she doesn't really react to this particularly. She just appears to be very silent and very submissive. It's almost as if she's used to being treated like this by Iago, and everyone seems to act as if it's socially acceptable for someone to berate their wife in this way in public. But as the play progresses, Emilia becomes more vocal, and she suggests to Desdemona that Othello might be jealous, because Desdemona is saying, you know, he's not jealous, there must be something else wrong with him. And Emilia says, actually, I think that he's quite jealous. So she seems to know a lot more about the world than Desdemona does, and she subtly tries to guide her mistress into the best course of action. However, she's still subservient to Iago, and she therefore takes Desdemona's handkerchief, which was a gift from Othello, a kind of a love token. I suppose if you've seen something like A Knight's Tale or a medieval film or read a medieval text, then you'll know that often the handkerchief was given as a love token. So handkerchief is really crucial to the play, and it was given from Othello to Desdemona as a token of his undying love. And as the play progresses, we see that for Othello, this is almost like a wedding ring or something like that. It's got that level of significance for him. And so Emilia gets this handkerchief and gives it to her husband. And Iago then uses this handkerchief to convince Othello of Desdemona's affair. At the end of Act 4, Emilia explains her belief that men and women have the same needs and desires, and that they should have some measure of equality. And this is where Emilia's character is really just absolutely brilliant. By the end of the play, she's one of the most likeable characters, and she really has a voice at that stage. In Act 5, it's Emilia who discovers Desdemona's body and who puts the pieces of the puzzle together. So she reveals how Iago has deceived Othello before being stabbed by Iago herself. And so Emilia at the end of the play is lying dead on the marriage bed as well, beside Desdemona's body. Cassio is a slightly more minor character, but only in terms of the number of lines he has. He's a very important character in the play. And we first hear about Cassio in Act 1, when Iago complains that Cassio has been promoted by Othello. Iago thinks that the promotion should have been his, and he describes Cassio as an arithmetician and a spinster with little experience on the battlefield. And it's a reference to that idea of the arithmetician that's given me the choice of picture to use for Cassio, the mathematical numbers. But the idea is that Cassio is more of an intellectual. He's not got a lot of practical experience. And Iago thinks that actually, if you're going to get promoted in the army, it should be practical experience that does that. And one of the reasons why Iago thinks Cassio has been promoted is that he's more upper class. You know, he's using the people that he knows to get him the things that he wants in life, rather than being promoted on his merit. And when Cassio arrives on Cyprus with the Venetian fleet, he's very expansive and effusive in his praise of Desdemona. He kisses her hand liberally, and that behaviour plays right into Iago's hands. You know, it might just be that because Cassio's from Florence, you know, he acts in a certain way towards women. He's very gallant towards women, and he believes they should be treated a certain way. And because he's an outsider in the Venetian society, you know, maybe the way Cassio acts is a little bit different and a little bit more open than Venetians would have been. And it's this which really starts to land Cassio in trouble. In Act 2, Othello leaves Cassio temporarily in charge of the garrison, so Othello and Desdemona go off to enjoy themselves, and the rest of the men, the rest of the soldiers, stay on guard. But Iago convinces Cassio to drink too much, and Cassio gets drunk very, very easily. Completely inebriated, Cassio ends up in a fight, and Othello, called away from his new wife, demotes him. So Cassio ends Act 2 in a really difficult situation. He's lost his job, he's lost his friend in Othello, he's lost Othello's respect, and he calls out, "Oh, reputation, 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 I have lost the immortal part of myself." So he feels like he's lost his whole identity at this point in the play. He's desperate to be forgiven by Othello, and so Cassio listens to Iago's advice and asks Desdemona for help. Now, as the audience, we can clearly see what the problem in doing that is. Now, Iago stage manages their conversation so that Othello sees them talking fervently. If you imagine people that are kind of talking about something really important but that they don't want other people to hear, so that's the kind of conversation that Desdemona and Cassio have. And they're having that in one corner of the stage, while Iago brings Othello on in the other corner of the stage. Then Iago plants this handkerchief in Cassio's rooms, and Cassio picks it up, he takes it out in public, he doesn't know what it is, but that gives further evidence for the affair. At the start of Act 5, Iago prompts Roderigo to attack Cassio. Cassio survives, and once Othello is dead, Cassio is made governor of Cyprus. Roderigo then, so this character who attacks Cassio. Now, he and Iago are the first characters to appear on stage in the play, and he is clearly an affluent young man who is absolutely infatuated with Desdemona. We learn that Roderigo has been making advances on Desdemona for some time, but he has been rejected by Brabantio. He's completely deceived by Iago. He trusts Iago completely, and so Roderigo sells his land. Iago says, you need to come with us, you need some money. So Roderigo says, "Oh, I'll sell everything I've got." He gives Iago money, and he joins the Venetian fleet on the journey to Cyprus. And we learn later that Roderigo has bought some jewels that he wants Iago to give to Desdemona, and Iago says to Roderigo, "Of course I'll give them to her," and those jewels just completely disappear. So Iago's clearly pocketing a lot of Roderigo's cash. Iago then uses Roderigo as his dupe in his plans, eventually prompting him to attack Cassio at the start of Act 5, as we've mentioned. Roderigo is really anxious about this and is clearly not up to the job, and he fails to kill his love rival. To prevent Roderigo from revealing Iago's role in the attack and with Othello's downfall, Iago stabs Roderigo and he dies on stage. Next character we're going to look at is Bianca. Now, Bianca's a prostitute living on Cyprus. She's madly in love with Cassio. She may have originally been played by the same actor of course, because it would have all been male actors in the time of Shakespeare, by the same actor who played Desdemona, so they never appear on stage together. But she's apparently the complete opposite of Desdemona. So if Desdemona is pure, she's increasingly powerless, she's the ideal woman in lots of ways. Bianca is very outspoken, is very sexualized, and is completely kind of treated by the others as being quite debased as well because of the lifestyle that she's been forced into. So she's the opposite of this very kind of pure upper class woman. And Bianca is easily made jealous. She becomes very angry when Cassio asks her to copy the pattern of the mysterious handkerchief that he found in his rooms. So as soon as she sees Cassio with this love token in his hand, like Othello, she believes that the handkerchief is evidence that Cassio is having an affair, and she wants to have Cassio all to herself. Bianca also appears on stage when Cassio is attacked by Roderigo. She's a highly emotional character at that point. She's very worried for her lover. And then Iago accuses Bianca of fabricating the plot to stab Cassio. Complete rubbish, of course, but at that point Iago was trying to distract everybody and get their attention away from him and onto somebody else. A couple of other characters just to look at really briefly. We've got Brabantio, who's Desdemona's father. His racist ideology prompts him to object to her marriage to Othello. And he remains in Venice, and at the end of the play we hear that he's died due to his distress about the elopement. The Duke of Venice is the one who decides that Othello can remain married to Desdemona, and he places Othello in charge of the Venetian fleet. Ludovico is a senator and a voice of authority and reason in the play. He's present in the senator's discussion about the elopement in Act 1, and then he kind of drops out of the play for Act 2 and Act 3, and he appears again in Act 4. So several days after the main fleet has travelled from Venice to Cyprus, Ludovico has travelled, and he arrives quite a few days after the others, at which point he witnesses Othello striking Desdemona. And if you can imagine that, Ludovico has initially seen Othello and Desdemona so madly in love with each other. And he arrives on Cyprus expecting to find the same thing. I mean, only a few days have passed after all. And what he sees absolutely horrifies him. And so he seems to almost be a commentator on the change in their relationship. And he's the voice of reason because he tries to bring Othello back to acting rationally at that point of the play. Alright, there's an optional independent learning task for you here. What I would suggest is that you copy the diagram and that you annotate each of the names of the characters with information about them, either that you learn from this video, or you could have a look at SparkNotes or Shmoop or one of the other brilliant revision websites that's out there. Once you've annotated the characters, you could then draw lines to link them together. So for example, link Brabantio up with Desdemona, showing that he's her father, that he feels very angry towards her, and so on. So thinking about the characters individually, and then also thinking about their connections to each other. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and the next video is going to look at some of the sources behind the text.